Good morning. I'm Fred Fisher, and joining in a conversation today with the partnership of Fred Fisher and Partners, Joe Coriaty and David Ross, who have been working together with me for over 30 years. And now Matt Kelley, Marisa Kurtzman, Nathan Prevendar, and Ikawa are joining us as what we refer to as the next generation. I would want to say something about a partnership to begin with. I would say it's the most important decision and process that I've engaged in my career. And I simply couldn't have had the career and the practice that we have together without Joe and David, and now without Matt and Taka and Marisa and Nathan. And so it's the single most important engagement that I've made in my career. And I see this as in a way, the next step, the next necessary step as the generations time passes and the generations change, that in order to have a legacy firm, that you need to rebuild and establish a new generation of leaders. And that is not a process that we took lightly. It took a number of years. And in some ways, it is a process whereby the leaders maybe not even consciously bring themselves forward and make it apparent who the next generation of leaders are. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about our partnership, David and Joe and myself, is the unique chemistry that three of us are very different. And yet there's been this, I think, marvelous balance, which has given us great success between how different we are and what each one of us brings into the conversations that we've had. And we certainly don't always agree. And yet we share some very solid common values and a commitment to each other and to our shared profession, of which we all honor very highly. I've always felt very fortunate to be an architect and to be able to have a practice. And the only way that you can do that is having the right people around you. So with that, maybe I'd like each one of you to maybe talk a bit about yourself and what brought you into the practice. And Matt, I'm looking at you on the screen, so why don't you start?
A bit about ourselves. So the background stuff, I don't know if I should go back. It asks where you grew up, so I'm wondering if that's kind of a thing we do or not. It's a bit.
Well, David, it's one of the things, in a way, that David and Joe and I have actually not always talked about as not being insignificant, is the fact that we're all Midwesterners. And that is there's a value set and a set of worldviews that come out of that I think have grounds our practice in a certain way. So you all are different, and I think that where one comes from actually does have something to do with.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I grew up in Maine, which is, I think did influence for sure kind of my perspective on architecture and kind of, I don't know, work in general. And I think that certainly growing up there made me kind of have a connection to architecture's relationship to landscape for sure. So I think that's really the first kernels I can think of that inspired me to become an architect. Didn't really have family background in architecture like Fred did. And so it wasn't inevitable for me to become an architect. It took a while for that to develop. I was also fairly technical. I started in engineering school when I went off to college, but always with this thought in mind that I wanted to kind of blend back into the arts in some way. And that after a couple of years, that became really obvious that I would kind of pursue architecture and, you know, get out of the technical side of engineering, which was a nice balance. I came to the practice, you know, I stayed on the East Coast for college, but then decided to come to California for grad school, and went to SciArc, and that's really where I started to hear a lot about Fred Fisher and Partners, and all the firms, all the Southern California firms. I didn't know too much about Fred's office before that, but really got interests. I would say maybe Houston, Santa Monica was the first project I was aware of at that time. And as I started to look for internships after my first year at SciArc, Fred was recommended by a professor. So that started my journey. I don't remember my first day at the office. That was so long ago at this point. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I think it was an even smaller office back then. And one of the great qualities of the office is how much of a family it feels like, kind of working in a mid-century house. And that really kept me coming back for more. The people were great that were there at the time, good mentors. And so, yeah, I felt appreciated right away as a young designer, and I still feel that way today. And is that enough for me?
Marisa?
Well, I'm a fourth generation native Californian. I grew up in Santa Monica, where I live today, which would make you think that I've never gone anywhere. But in fact, actually, I traveled and lived in a lot of countries, starting at a very young age, starting at age 4. My family lived in Mexico, and then subsequent to that, I lived in Switzerland and Spain and France, and then I moved all over the country for college and for graduate school and after. So I kind of joke. People always say that I'm the least Californian you've ever met. But after a long time away, I was finishing graduate school, and my sister-in-law was pregnant with my nephew, and my parents weren't getting any younger, and so I decided to give it a shot and come back to Los Angeles and see whether maybe both of us had grown up a little bit. And in fact, we had. So I came to FF&P right after graduate school. I don't really remember how I came about it, other than I think I had a list of, you know, top 20 firms in Los Angeles, and started digging around, looking at websites, and the work impressed me. I knew a lot of it because so much of it was local to my own life and my own childhood. At the time when I started, FF&P was working on the Annenberg Beach House, which was actually where I learned to swim. So there was always this kind of personal quality to working at the office. And I don't really remember my first day, other than that, having come from working on the East Coast, I think I was overdressed. But I do remember that during the process of actually interviewing, one thing that really struck me was how, in an industry known for a lot of ego, everybody I talked to seemed just like a fundamentally very decent person, and fairly low key, and kind of Californian, ironically. So, you know, since I'm actually about to celebrate my 14th anniversary as an employee of FF&P, and I've never looked back. It's been a great fit for me. I think the combination of camaraderie and creativity and, you know, left and right brain has been terrific. As far as getting into architecture, I came to it quite late. I actually was, as Fred likes to say, a liberal arts person. I studied art history in college. I always liked to draw and play with Legos, but I never really considered architecture until after finishing school and looking for work in museum, I wanted to be a museum curator, and quickly realized there were about 5 museum curator positions available at any given time in the entire world. So that didn't seem terribly practical. Plus, I wasn't very excited about getting a PhD. And so I was living in Boston, and I lived near Harvard. And I believe that the former tenants in my apartment building had been students at the Graduate School of Design, because we got a lot of architecture-related mail for them. And one day I came home in the spring, after this sort of year of pondering what I was going to do with myself, and there was a large envelope in my mailbox, not addressed to me, from the Boston Society of Architecture. So I opened it on a whim, and inside was a flyer for Harvard's summer program at the Graduate School of Design, which is called Career Discovery. And I was looking to discover a career at that time. So I quit my job and did that, and the rest is history. So, crime, which, I always joke that opening somebody else's mail is technically a felony, but crime pays. It doesn't pay a lot in my case, but it, pays a little. So.
Nathan?
Yeah. So I guess I'm probably one of the rarer ones. Architecture was something that got introduced to me really quite early, and I knew early in my life that this was something I wanted to pursue. I actually was born in Washington State, but grew up in northern Minnesota, so I have, quote unquote, that Midwest upbringing and sensibility as the practice has. But I grew up in kind of an environment of the do-it-yourself type. My family did pretty much everything from literally trenching sewer lines, electrical lines, to building buildings, to making quilts, to making rugs, really just pretty much everything we were kind of doing ourselves, just because that was the upbringing my parents had with kind of my mom's side with her Native American upbringing, and my father's side kind of with the greatest generation upbringing, the World War II era kind of families where you really did need to do everything yourself. So because of that, I was exposed to building, to what goes into buildings, and thinking about, the creation of something. And I was also, just like many of the rest of us, really deeply interested in the arts. I was practicing the arts, and then started seeing, hey, these two things kind of actually merge together. So in high school, I actually shadowed an architect. I did a summer study program. And so I knew really that this was the thing I wanted to kind of get engaged in, since it had the arts, but it also had the creation of something. So you could stand back and look and say, I was part of that, which it's pretty amazing that this field offers that to the community. So it's not just for one person, but it's really giving something back. Then my family moved to Central California my senior year of high school. So it was kind of a huge, amazing change from the small town in Minnesota to a larger town. And then, day one in Los Angeles was literally starting undergraduate studies in architecture. So it was kind of this wild shift of scale. And through that, that's how I actually got introduced to Frederick Fisher and Partners. Actually, it was first and second year design studio. We did a precedent study on the building that we're actually inhabiting. It's A. Quincy Jones building. And so we studied it, came and toured it. We had to hand draw on Mylar drawings of the building, and then make partie models of this building. So it's pretty amazing. And then actually fast forward a couple more years, completely forgot about Frederick Fisher and Partners until a professor of mine had been working here at the time and mentioned, hey, we're hiring, would you be interested in coming by for an interview? And I said, oh, that sounds great. So I was lucky enough to be interviewed by David Ross, and clearly things went pretty good. He toured me around the building, and at that time I didn't have the heart to tell him that I actually knew quite a bit about the building, which was kind of funny. So we kept my mouth shut. So I figured things are going good, so don't want to tip things. So it was just kind of saw right away, wow, it's an amazing group of people, amazing fit. You could see the building and see how the building came together. And as I mentioned, the do-it-yourself, that interest of mine, being the Renaissance person, it just like everything kind of clicked into place. And unlike some of the other, my new partners, I actually remember the first week, not really the first day here, but it was kind of that first week. Because day one, my chair broke and it kind of took a week to get a new chair. So kind of bouncing around the studio. And then also, you know, my computer didn't quite work, so I had to bring in my laptop. So there's these kind of all these little moments that you kind of realize, okay, they're trying to help, but this is kind of just a comedy of errors. And then also, I started on two amazing projects. One which was completed, and the other, unfortunately, we just got through design development on. But it was day one. Immediately, Joe and David kind of threw me into the deep end on the design charrette for the Oberlin student housing. So I was working with Matt in envisioning what that could be. And at the same time, we were working on a private residence for the owner of the Hillstone, Houston's restaurant chain. And to hear that this individual wanted to live inside a cabinet was such an amazing idea, and thinking about craft and how things come together, that, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't have picked a better place to really, you know, be here. So hence, you know, as Marisa said, fast forward 14, 15 years and haven't looked back since.
I grew up in Hokkaido, Japan, where is northern island and a relatively rural area of Japan. My mom still is a calligrapher. I was exposed to her art making, Japanese calligraphy painting from when I was very young. And then I was always watching that, how those art is created. And when I grew up, I became her critique, and then she always asked my opinion. So I've been always kind of exposed to that kind of environment. That kind of quite a bit affected direction of my future. Then maybe first time I'm interested in architecture was when I was like 5 or 6 or 7. My dad got a house built, and I was watching during the construction always. Every day I was watching how people make the building, and I was quite interested in making such a large object. That is the kind of first interest. And when I graduated to elementary school, the booklet school issued what I want to be in the future. I put a architectural designer at that point. That was the kind of early stage I was interested. Then I went to a little different area for high school, and that area is kind of, Japan opened the port to Western culture very early, and a lot of beautiful churches are there. So I was looking around those things, and I was very impressed by how architecture can move people's heart. So that is when I was a high school student, I was kind of struggling, becoming a fashion designer versus architect. I was really thinking between, but eventually architecture interested me more. So that is the point I decided to become an architectural designer. Then when I was a college student, I studied in Japan as well as London. I was exposed to a lot of amazing architecture in Europe. I was traveling around Europe and then inspired by so many architecture when I was college. Then I worked a little bit and I designed my parents' house and then some other houses after I graduated. Then I thought, what is missing? I haven't seen America. Maybe I should see America. Then I traveled this country and looked around Frank Lloyd Wright and many great architecture in this country. And I decided to come to graduate school to this country. And I picked SCIARC. That's how I started living in this country. Then I decided to study graduate school architecture, but at the same time, I want to do some supplemental art experience. Then I studied photography. So photography is my supplemental artwork. I kind of seriously took it and studied and a little bit worked as professionally. Then my professor at SCIARC was actually used to be teacher for Fred, and that was a connection to the office. I was introduced by my professor to the office. I visited, and I introduced to Fred. And after a while, when I was graduating and decided to interview here. That was the kind of first engagement to the office with Fred. And so what I liked about this office is the timeless character of the architecture in this office. That's kind of, I always, my actually thesis at SCIARC was about how architecture can affect people's feeling experience, but at the same time, not the fast communication, more slower communication, which people experience deeper again by spending time. That is, in a way, it's a timelessness. So, you know, first information, if the information first, you catch first, but you consume first. I'm more interested in communication with design, spending time and understanding deeper, and then that is becoming part of your lifetime experience. So that's what I'm interested about this office, and I'm very much enjoying working in this office and designing architecture here.